The NHL season has started up, and our sample size from the beginning until now has been decently filled out. Sure, this is not the be-all and end-all. Not all good teams are going to stay good, not all bad players are going to stay bad. But there is a reasonable discussion to be had for the start of 23-24 as to who has been the most disappointing. Now, to help us out, we're going over onto TSN because 3 days ago, this is where Craig Button on the 7-Eleven That's Hockey segment had his list of the biggest disappointments so far. He listed 5 things, and I say things and not players or teams because there's a lot of diversity here, but because it makes for a catchier title, we're going to go out there and talk about the 5 most disappointing players of the year thus far in 23-24. Starting out with Craig Button's first name, Craig. No, just kidding, funny pun. But the first name that Craig Button lists as to the most disappointing this year is Trevor Zegras of the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, this guy scored a goal earlier today against the Flyers, and yes, that is true. Zegras scored his first goal of the year off of a brilliant turnover play by Ryan Strome, where he steals the puck, walks in, drops it back for Zegras, who walks in and snipes it. First goal on the year, it took him a while to get here, but he's already at that number. However, outside of the goal he had scored in today's action, Trevor Zegras was at one point an assist throughout the first 7 games of the year. And it was so bad that he even got benched earlier this season for an entire period's worth of time. Zegras just has not had that same level of swagger that we're so used to seeing. He hasn't had that star power. He hasn't been able to make things happen. Things have been very disappointing for Z starting out this 23-24, and this is coming off the tails of a big contract re-signing that took an extraordinarily long amount of time. This is his first season on $5.75 million a year, and he goes on till 25-26 with that dollar amount. Of course, there's time for him to bounce back, but the start of this year has definitely not been up to standard. Moving over onto the 4th most disappointing player, or players, Craig Button lists the entire Carolina Hurricanes goaltending core as the 4th most disappointing entity in the NHL. Now, we're just going to read the stats here. 4 games played, Frederik Andersen, 3.38 goals against and an .875 save percentage. Antti Ranta has 4 games played, a 3.06 goals against and an .867 save percentage. Fyodor Kotkachov has 3 games played, 4.33 goals against, and an .836 save percentage. These goalies are not performing up to snuff. For a team like the Carolina Hurricanes, when we all said, hey, they could be a very legit cup contender. This team is going to be solid. This year finally may be their year. They've just been getting better every single season. And then the start of the year comes along and you don't have a goalie over an .875 save percentage. They've been allowing goals like crazy. And the thing is, you can't really hope that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to continue just outscoring away all their problems because what kind of game strategy, game plan is that? Like, you can't long-term projectably see a goalie with an .875 save percentage going out there and leading you to a Stanley Cup. And that's your best one. The other one's .867, .836. This has been a terrible trio in Carolina to start out the year. Of course, we know Frederik Andersen is better than this. We know Ranta, Kotkachov, they're probably better than this. So what are the odds they bounce back? I'd say more than likely, but still, to start out the year, this has been a terrible showcase of goaltending out of Raleigh. Moving over on to the 3rd most disappointing entity in the NHL as labeled by Craig Button, he says the Pittsburgh Penguins as a whole have been disappointing. And here's the thing. Statistically, you could say, hey, Tristan Jarry's at a .917, Nedeljkovic, .914. Their goals against average numbers are not bad either. The points? Malkin's at 9 points in 7 games, Gensel, Crosby, point-per-game guys. Even Erik Karlsson is at 4 points in 7 games, which is not a 100-point pace like he had last year, but still it's okay. But the problem with the Pittsburgh Penguins is that they came into this season with so much expectations on their hands. Sure, we just talked about the Carolina Hurricanes goaltending situation. Well, at least the Hurricanes are 2nd in the Metro. The Penguins are last. This team has just not been able to keep up in the standings with their competition, and as a result, they are so down in the dumps in regards to where they are. They're tied for last in the Eastern Conference. Now, sure, it's a 4-way tie with the Panthers, the Sens, and the Sabres, but For a team that just went all in on Erik Karlsson, for Kyle Dubas to go out here and make this the intention that they still wanted to keep this Asian core together and win hockey games, maybe even win a Stanley Cup once more, this is not the start you wanted to see. The points are looking all right. The save percentages, the numbers, the stats, they're all there. But this team is 3-4. They can't find ways to beat very beatable opponents despite the leadership, despite the veteran talent, despite the accomplishments of all the guys on that team. For some reason, it's just not working for Pittsburgh to start out 23-24. Moving on to the second most disappointing player or entity in the NHL, according to Craig Button, he has Nazem Kadri in isolation as the second most disappointing person in the NHL so far. 33 years old, $7 million a year, 2029 is the expiration date, and as we had talked about in yesterday's video, discussing the Battle of Alberta, Nazem Kadri has 1 point in 8 games played. He had 56 points last year, and that was already seen as a decline. Guess what? This year he is on pace for 10 points. Now, of course, 10 is such a small number, he is not going to get only 10 points. He'll probably bounce back in some capacity and get, hopefully, at the very least, 40 points. I mean, the guy's making $7 million a year. You'd hope he'd score at least that much. But Nazem Kadri has looked unmotivated. He has not been in a good spot to succeed. He has not been putting himself in the right positions to succeed. And Craig Button even says that when Nazem Kadri is on his game, he is an agitator, he is a creative destructor, he goes out there, he gets under his opponent's skin, he is really engaged, always looking to try to improve his team's position on the ice, and that's why he had that 87-point year in 71 games played in 21-22 with the Avalanche. That was literally a 100-point pace campaign. And the next year, okay, he gets his payday, he goes to Calgary, he signs $7 million a year, but then he doesn't produce a 100-point season. He has half that, 56 points. Now this year he is looking even worse, and Craig Button goes out there and specifically calls Kadri out for not being the guy that the Calgary Flames ended up signing. Now you could say there's an argument to be made about Jonathan Huberdeau also falling into this category because that guy's making a boatload of money too, and he's not producing to that magnitude. But Nazem Kadri, I'd say that the prominence of him being bad is a lot worse than Huberdeau being bad, mostly because at the very least Huberdeau still is looking like a threat, and he has a few points. It's just Kadri has 1. Like, you can't go worse than that. So that's why Craig Button has Kadri as the second biggest disappointment this year. And moving over on to number 1, this should come as no surprise, but Button lists the Edmonton Oilers as an entire team as the biggest disappointment to start out 23-24. We've talked about this a ton. We already talked about this yesterday, the Battle of Alberta. But the Oilers suck this year, and it's been really, really bad. The only team worse than them in the NHL is San Jose, and that team is on pace to not even winning a game. The Oilers have been so terrible defensively. They've been getting goalied by opposition, and they just cannot find the strength to force wills at their hands. Jay Woodcroft, the system is not working. You lose out on McDavid, that doesn't matter. You still sucked when you had him. This team has been in such a strange position ever since the start of the season that the cup or bust narrative is very quickly shifting over to bust. And now you have fans clamoring for Evan Bouchard to get traded. Y'all are talking about upgrading the goaltending. Y'all are talking about Draisaitl yeeting away in a few years. McDavid might be doing the same thing. Everything that could have gone wrong for the Oilers has gone wrong. And of course, with the Battle of Alberta, the Heritage Classic, going on tomorrow, we're going to see the ultimate prize as to what this mid-showdown has in store for us. This has been the list of the top 5 most disappointing players, and I'm just going to say players because it's easier to say, rolls off the tongue a little bit better. Most disappointing players in the NHL so far, as labeled out by Craig Button. The video segment wherein he talks about these entities will be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read this. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section. How do you feel about calling these guys disappointing? Trevor Zegras of the Anaheim Ducks, the 3 goalies in Carolina, the Pittsburgh Penguins as a whole, Nazem Kadri from the Calgary Flames, and the Oilers team as a whole as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Rolls 99, and bye.